In the last lectures, we set up React Native Navigation. Now we got a broken app where we just see a splash screen. That's normal, because React Native Navigation has its own way of rendering screens, well, to the screen. It consists of two main parts, two main things we have to do. We have to register some screens, and then we have to start an app, so to say. And that can be confusing because we can't even start an app if we already have a running one. But an app simply means you have to tell React Native Navigation what to display. You programmatically load something. You no longer declare your starting component as we previously did in our index file. So why don't we do that? Let's make it simple. Let's simply remove all that Redux related code from our index Android file. Don't need the provider in there anymore. Let's just import our app here and let's render app again. This is the setup we had earlier in this course. And I'm going to copy this and paste it into my iOS file too. Now app, on the other hand, is also not what we can load. App is our app container. Now what I will do is in my source folder, I'll create a new folder which I'll name screens. Screens will just be components, but components we load through navigation, not components we include as part of our JSX code. And there, I want to start this application with an authentication screen, where the user has to sign up or sign in. We'll add this functionality later in the course. I already want to add the screen. So I'll add a new subfolder in screens, and I'll just name it auth. And in there, I'll add an auth.js file, my authentication screen. Now, screens basically are just containers. So first of all, they are React components, and typically they are stateful components. So in a web-based app, we would have called them containers. And in web-based apps, screens are typically what you would have loaded with the router. So here, I will simply import React and component, because I plan on creating a class-based component from React, and then I create my class and I'll name it auth screen. That's optional. You could name it just auth, but since it represents a screen here, I want to name it as such. So then I extend my component here. I have a render function. So this is just a normal React component. That's important. And then I export as a default auth screen, just like that. Now this auth screen will be brand new. I won't reuse an existing component for that. We will rewrite quite a lot of our application, to be honest. And just to see how we can load it, let's start very simple. Let's simply import a view and a text from React Native, and let's render that. So I'll render a view here, and between my view tags, I'll output a text where I say auth screen. And we'll work on the content of that screen later, but for now I just want to have something on the screen. And that's text.auth. So this is my auth screen, and the goal now is to load this through React Native Navigation. To achieve this, I'm actually going to go to my app.js file and remove all the code that's in there. Yep, it's all gone now. We, as I said, will rewrite a lot of parts of our application. Now we're getting serious and we're diving into our app as it should look at the end. So we're going to rewrite a lot of that. In app.js, I won't render any component. Instead here, I will do the two things I mentioned, register screens and start an application for React Native Navigation. Therefore, I first of all will import something from React Native Navigation. And that something is an object called navigation, with a capital N though. Now the first step is to, as I said, register some screens. Because when using React Native Navigation, we load screens by an ID which we assign, and we can only load screens which we registered in advance, so before we try to load them basically. So therefore, here I will do just that with navigation, and then there is a register component method I can call. Now, one important thing. You have to register a component before you can load it through React Native Navigation. You can't load other components. You can load other components as part of the JSX code of the screens you're loading, but you can't load them directly through React Native Navigation. So we want to register a new component here. So a component which we can load through navigation. Let's import it. I'll name it offScreen and import it from source screens off. So from that file. The register component method we're calling here takes at least 2 arguments. The first argument is a unique identifier of that screen. And you can choose any you want, just make sure it's unique. I'm going to use awesome-places offScreen. And that's a typical pattern. You have something like your app name, then a dot, and then the screen name. And this should be unique. The second argument here is a function. So here, this is a arrow function in my case, where you simply return the offScreen. It's essentially the function React Native Navigation will execute when it actually needs to load your screen. You might recall this pattern from the index.js file, where you also executed this code as a function here for registering a component. So back in our app.js file, we registered our component here, navigation register component. The next step is to start an app. And again, this can be confusing. The app, of course, has started. This is simply an app for React Native Navigation, so to say. Here, when you visit React Native Navigation, you can visit the top-level API guide. And there you find 2 different ways of starting an app. A tab-based app, so an application with tabs at the bottom, or a single-screen app, where the full screen is just one screen. It's what I want to use for the off-screen. We'll also implement tabs later, but obviously the off-screen should be one single full-screen screen. For that, I'll reach out to navigation, and there I'll start a single screen app. So I'll execute this command. Now, as you see, there are a lot of options you can pass to it. Definitely read through them and style it and configure it whichever way you want to use it. I'll use a very basic setup here. So I will execute this method, pass a JavaScript object, and the one thing we definitely have to pass is the screen configuration, where we say which screen to load. Now, screen just is another JavaScript object where you configure which screen to load and which title it has in the navbar and so on. So inside screen, there is another screen property, and here you use your unique identifier. So in this case, of the only screen we have. And then I'll also add a title property here and say login. So this should be displayed in the navbar, which will automatically be added by this library. Now with that, we got everything in place. How do we proceed? Super simple. Let's go back to index.ios. We no longer need to use app registry. React Native Navigation will do that for us. We just need to import app. And of course, we could have run that code in that file for this reason. But since we have 2 different entry points, to not duplicate our code, I outsourced it. So we just import app here. And why is this enough? Why don't we have to do anything else? Because in app, we instantly run all our code and we execute this code, which will just load a screen. So with that, make sure to save all files. And then if you reload your applications, already worked here for iOS, we see the off screen, it's great. For Android, it seems to be stuck. So simply let's clear it here and let's try restarting the app. If it still doesn't like you, try rebuilding it. And you should eventually also see off screen there. And as you see, you get this navbar with login for free in the respective style of the platform you're running this on. So that's even more than you get from most React Native components. You get styling which adapts to the platform you're running it on. Great. So we started a single screen app. We have a single screen. Now, obviously we could continue working on the off screen, but I want to postpone this and dive deeper into navigation. So let's now see how we can leave that screen to move on in the app and possibly go to a tab-based navigation once we did successfully log in. So let's see how that works in the next lectures.